Okay, so welcome everybody to our third discussion of Fratelli Tutti, the Pope's encyclical on fraternity and social friendship. And today we'll be covering chapters 5 and 6. So there'll be one more next week for the last two chapters, and we'll try and sum everything up. But for this first one in chapter 5, it's all about politics. What everybody's thinking about these days with the election a week away. It's such a good time to be thinking about this because everybody's thinking about it already. And the refreshing thing about what Pope Francis shares with us is he really is trying to get us to break out of the now and say, we need to think really big picture. How can we just change the whole system in a sense? And so that's what he's trying to do in chapter 5 here. And he begins by saying, again, same structure as all the others, right? Everything in the blue box is direct from his encyclical, quoted exactly how it is in the encyclical, and any thoughts or anything I have will be over my head. But he begins chapter 5 by saying the development of a global community of fraternity based on the practice of social friendship on the part of peoples and nations calls for a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good. So I think that's his whole thesis for this 6th chapter, right? And remember, I think the way he's understanding social friendship is kind of like the ideal of social justice. So the same way Aristotle says that friends really have no need of justice because it's kind of the highest level of justice, I think he's just trying to reframe social justice as social friendship. Which I think is a very beautiful way to talk about it. And he has 5 main sections in this 5th chapter: forms of populism and liberalism, and then international power, social and political charity, the exercise of political love, and fruitfulness over results. So those are his 5 sections. So the first section on forms of populism and liberalism, he starts by contrasting popular versus populist. And if we wish to maintain that society is more than a mere aggregate of individuals, the term people proves necessary. And I love this. I love what he's doing here with people. The word people has a deeper meaning that can't be set forth in purely logical terms. And it's kind of the same thing as person. The way we think about person has taken on so much meaning. It's just ripe with meaning in our culture and society, except person is kind of the individual, right? And we know all about that because we're all individualistic. We talk about person all the time. What Pope Francis is trying to do here is say, hey, there's a correlate to person called people, and we're not spending nearly enough time thinking about people. And he talks a lot about people in relation to culture. So a living and dynamic people, a people with a future, is one constantly open to a new synthesis through its ability to welcome differences. And he says the biggest issue is employment. Employment, he says, is the finest help we can give to the poor, the best path to a life of dignity. And when I read that, I'm like, man, that is absolutely Father Gregory Boyle, right? Homeboy Industries. Their motto is nothing stops a bullet like a job. It's just such an incredible operation he has going on down there in Los Angeles. Like lawyers working pro bono for all these people, tattoo removal 24/7. They have all these job placement services, so many services, training there at Homeboy Bakery, at the restaurant, to get people experience so they can get a job because they realize nothing stops a bullet like a job. And that's exactly what Pope Francis is tapping into here. The biggest issue is employment. And that's the biggest help we can give the poor, because it just doesn't give them food on their table or money so that they can do what they need to do. It's a path to a life of dignity, he says, right? It's increasing their skills. It's building relationships. It's being part of society and culture and contributing to it. It's not just a job. It's so much more than that if you find the right person and fit them to where they can just blossom, you know? Okay. And the next little section of this chapter 5 is the benefits and limits of liberal approaches. And he frames this in terms of love of neighbor and brings it right back to the greatest commandment and the second commandment that we heard last weekend in the gospel, right? Love of neighbor is concrete and squanders none of the resources needed to bring about historical change that can benefit the poor and disadvantaged. Everything depends on our ability to see the need for a change of heart, attitudes, and lifestyles. And we got to put human dignity back at the center. And on that pillar of human dignity, that's how we build a different social structure, the new ones that we need. So he's saying, okay, first we gotta get a focus on what's most important. And it's from that we got to build the social structures, right? We can't build social structures trying to solve problems or things that are wrong. We can't look at the bad things and say, how are we going to fix them? He's saying, no, we got to look at human dignity. That's the pillar. We got to build out from that. We don't want band-aid solutions, right? We want solutions that promote growth rather than fixing issues. Okay, the next section of chapter 5 is all about international power. He says, yet today's world presents us with many false rights. People are claiming rights all the time. Nobody mentions, when they talk about a right, the responsibilities that need to come with those rights. And he has such big ideas here. He says that I would also note the need for a reform of the United Nations organization and likewise of economic institutions and international finance. I'm like, huge. And it's true. All those things do need to be reformed. And the question of how to go about doing it is such a big picture. I hate when people like read an encyclical like this and just blow it off as like, oh, he has all these ideas. No, this is more of a, okay, everybody needs to listen. We need a dialogue. We need to think big picture, right? Stop trying to put me in a box. This is so far outside the box. It's not fair to be putting me in a box with this thing. And courage and generosity, he says, are needed in order to freely establish shared goals and to ensure the worldwide observance of certain essential norms. He wants everybody to come together and agree on shared goals. And this was my thought when I read about how much of today's world, I mean, we have false rights. Rights come with responsibilities. We always have to remember that rights come with responsibilities. I went to the US Immigration Office, right, on the website, and it lists, it goes, here are the rights, here are the responsibilities, right next to each other. It's very clear. And this is what it said. I mean, I didn't write this, I just copied it from our immigration office. It says, you have the right to express yourself, but you also have a responsibility to respect the rights, beliefs, and opinions of others. You have to realize that our freedom of speech, you can't just go around hate mongering and belittling people and being mean and angry, because the right to free speech comes with a responsibility to respect, and we need to think of our rights in terms of the correlative responsibilities that come with it. Anyway, I think that's part of what Pope Francis is talking about here. Let's move on. Okay, social and political charity is the next section of chapter 5. And it's split into the politics we need, and then he talks a little bit about political love, and then there's another section. But first, when he's laying out the politics we need, he says, true statescraft is manifest when, in difficult times, we uphold high principles and think of the long-term common good. Thinking of those who will come after us does not serve electoral purposes, yet it is what authentic justice demands. And this is so true. I think about like my generation and the generation that came after me, like my nephew who just started college now. And I think about that in contrast to like the teachers I had when I was my nephew's age, who would tell me stories like, yeah, I went to college and worked my way through college, working part-time at this mechanic shop, paying off my tuition. And I'm like, what? We got to borrow like 50 grand per year now. We graduate with so much in debt. Like, how did this change so dramatically in just a generation or two, you know? And I think that that's the type of thing that Pope Francis is saying, that we need to make a massive shift away from that. We need to forget ourselves and focus almost oh, let me see my little, yeah. We need a major political reorientation, possibly as dramatic as forget the living and focus entirely on those coming next. That's bold. I don't know if Pope Francis is going that far, but if we do something that dramatic, I think we would focus more on long-term common good, focus on the generation that's coming next. And you can see a lot of this thought mentality in Laudato Si, the Pope's previous encyclical, right? He's saying, okay, we got to think about this planet in terms of we're giving it to the next generation who's not here yet. It's that type of thinking that I think he wants to get instilled in things as common as college loans to go to school. You know, think about how we can structure them such that our grandkids will come out on top, you know? So it's a very different mindset. And then political love. This is really neat because he looks at politics from the perspective of charity, the greatest of the virtues, right? And he says charity finds expression not only in close and intimate relationships, but also in macro relationships, social, economic, political, these bigger spheres. And this political charity is born of a social awareness that transcends every individualistic mindset. Each of us is fully a person when we are part of a people. People and person are correlative terms. I think that's another main idea in this encyclical, is getting away from individualism. And that's so hard for us because so much of our last couple centuries has been moving towards an individualistic mindset. But we need to come together as people, right? We're not just persons. We also have to be part of a people. And then effective love is the last section in this social and political charity part. And he says, effective love, charity is at the heart of every healthy and open society. And charity needs the light of the truth that we constantly seek. That light is both the light of reason and the light of faith, and does not admit any form of relativism. I like that. That harkens back to St. John Paul II, right? His Faith and Reason encyclical, where truth is both reason and faith, two wings of a bird, you know, the opening lines of Faith and Reason. Okay, now this is my thoughts. When I hear him say people and person are correlative terms, I think back to St. Thomas Aquinas, and he has such a beautiful definition of person. St. Thomas Aquinas says, person signifies what is most perfect in all of nature. So it's kind of like nature flowers and blossoms into conscious awareness of personhood. And that's kind of when he's talking about the Trinity, God, most perfect. God is the most perfect thing. That's why he's three persons in one nature. So he defines person as what is most perfect in all of nature. And I'm thinking about that in relation to what Pope Francis is doing here with person and people. And my random little thought is, well, if person signifies what is most perfect in all nature, can we say that perhaps a people signifies what is most perfect in a culture? So when you have a culture fully developed, it produces a people. That's the correlative of a person. I don't know if that's just a random idea for me, but that's where my mind went. Okay. Okay, I think this is the last section of chapter 5, the exercise of political love. And this distinction, I think, there's so much. Oh my gosh, I think somebody could write a whole dissertation on this little distinction that he writes here. He says there's a kind of love that is elicited. Okay, so its acts proceed directly from the virtue of charity and are directed to individuals and peoples. So this is the Good Samaritan, straight up, right? You're walking along, you see somebody who's hurt, somebody's down, somebody's damaged, somebody's homeless. You take care of them immediately. You buy them a house, you get them some food, you get them a job, you do something. That's elicited love. But then he says there's also a commanded love. And this is expressed in those acts of charity that spur people to create more sound institutions, more just regulations, more supportive structures. So this commanded love is like the laws of our society and how we build up our cities and our politics, right? This is commanded love. In a sense, it's kind of like legislating charity. Now, the trick here is when I hear this is what is the correct balance between elicited and commanded love, right? You can't write laws forcing people to become saints, right? You can't do that. You can't write laws such that people need to live lives of heroic virtue. You can't command sainthood. I mean, that's why Jesus came and died on a cross to show his love so that he would elicit love from us, so that he would elicit sanctity and holiness and saints out of the church. But there is a way where commanded love is important, right? We want to raise taxes so that we can get the food to the people it needs to be, So there's this tension, this balance between elicited and commanded love. And I think it's just brilliant the way Pope Francis just sets out this distinction like this, because I think it's absolutely true distinction. I think the difficulty is finding the right balance between the two. Okay. Sacrifices born of love. World politics needs to make the effective elimination of hunger one of its foremost and imperative goals. And then Pope Francis straight up says hunger is criminal. Food is an inalienable right. Wow, that's awesome. And when I read that, I think of how can we not do that with how much communication and how well we are at organizing things nowadays? We absolutely should be able to make this a reality. He has some sections where he talks about capitalism cannot be the main principle by which we are organizing the world. And that's kind of what's happening now, which ends up with really bizarre situations like this, right? You have this little can of peaches, right, that were grown in Argentina, packed in Thailand, and then sold in the United States. So you have this fruit, right, grown in Argentina, shipped all the way over to Thailand to be packed, and shipped all the way back to the United States just to be sold to us. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And the only reason it's this inefficient and this crazy is because of economics and the capitalist structure that we currently have. Like if we reordered things to think about, no, the primary goal is feeding everybody. Dang, look, this food just flew over so many hungry people. Like we're wasting jet fuel just to get this little prepackaged thing of fruit. I don't know. With Pope Francis's claim here, food is an inalienable right. All the technology and organization we have nowadays, we should be able to make hunger extinct. We really, really should if we made it our goal. Okay, a love that integrates and unites. Political charity is also expressed in a spirit of openness to everyone. Here, economic negotiations do not work. Something else is required. An exchange of gifts for the common good. That's beautiful. It would take such a major shift in mindset when you're talking about political negotiations to have it not be about economics, but about gifts, exchanging gifts for the common good. He's got such beautiful ideas here. Okay. Fruitfulness over results. Politics, too, must make room for a tender love of others. What is tenderness? It is love that draws near and becomes real. And the rest of this quote is just as beautiful, but I couldn't fit it all on here. It's amazing. Every person is immensely holy and deserves our love. It is truly noble to place our hope in the hidden power of the seeds of goodness we sow. and thus to initiate processes whose fruits will be reaped by others. And I mean, there are different professions in the world that give us a little hint of this. And he's saying we need to do it at a political level for the next generation, that we may not even reap the benefits of it. Teaching high school, middle school for 4 years was great. I got to know all these kids. And now that's one of the best benefits of it is randomly, just random surprises out of the blue. I'll see one of my students in some random place and they'll be like, "Hi, Mr. Winkowicz," 5 years later. And it's like you're planting these seeds that produce these amazing fruits later. He's saying we need to think that way in terms of cross-generational things. So we're planting seeds for the subsequent generations to reap. Okay, that was the end of chapter 5. Now, chapter 6 is dialogue and friendship in society. So the main focus of this really is about dialogue and how we can build up friendship in society. Approaching, speaking, listening, looking at, coming to know and understand one another, and to find common ground. All these things can be summed up in the one word, dialogue. I think that's the point of chapter 6 right there, that quote. So he's going to talk about all these different things, all these different aspects of dialogue. And the three parts are social dialogue for a new culture, and then recovering kindness as the conclusion. So social dialogue for a new culture. A country flourishes when constructive dialogue occurs between its many rich cultural components. And here's where it's pretty harsh on some of our contemporary things. Social networks like Facebook and stuff. Pope Francis says, no, these exchanges are merely parallel monologues. And it's true. That's so harsh, but it's true. It's just people talking to themselves in parallel. And he also says the media's noisy potpourri of facts and opinions is also an obstacle to dialogue, because people forget that. I love the very first pastor I had, the first residency year I did. One of the greatest bits of advice he told me was, you have to remember that it's just as important what you choose not to say as what you choose to say, because people need just as much time to think about what you're saying, right? When you have dialogue, thinking is part of the process and silence is part of the process. And so much of our media and advertising situation doesn't leave time for that, And then, this is great too. The heroes of the future will be those who can break with this unhealthy mindset and determine respectfully to promote truthfulness aside from personal interests. Heroes for sure. We need more people like that. Mm-hmm. Then building together, he talks about building together. Authentic social dialogue involves the ability to respect the other's point of view and to admit that it may include legitimate convictions and concerns. And then the basis of consensus, he says, the solution cannot be relativism. What is now happening and drawing us into a perverse and barren way of thinking is the reduction of ethics and politics to physics. And because when you reduce things to physics, the principle by which modern physics works, going back to Galileo, Descartes, right? The principle by which modern physics works is it's trying to model theories that can perfectly predict the future, like what's going to happen, by looking at all the mechanical forces going on in a situation. And what Pope Francis is saying, reduction of ethics and politics to this predictive mentality just perverts and makes our thinking barren, because it gets rid of the soul, it gets rid of free will, it gets rid of the spirit, because those things can't be predicted. Okay, consensus and truth. There's no need then to oppose the interests of society, consensus, and the reality of objective truth. So Pope Francis says you don't oppose those three things. You shouldn't oppose society, consensus, and objective truth, because these three realities can be harmonized whenever, through dialogue, people are unafraid to get to the heart of an issue. And it's so true. I mean, listening to the presidential debates made me want to rip my hair out because so frequently, I think that if they were actually trying to get to the heart of the issue, I think they would actually agree on a lot of things. You know, I think there was some wisdom in the founders. I don't know if you guys know this, but when our country was founded, the way it was originally written was that whoever got the most votes became president and second place became vice president. Like, could you imagine if that happened, that it would force them to work together? I mean, I think there was some wisdom in that. It would never work. I wish it would work. I don't know what I'm saying, but people need to be unafraid to get to the heart of an issue through dialogue, right? Anyway, the dignity of others is to be respected in all circumstances. Gosh, thinking again of the presidential debates. Because human beings possess an intrinsic worth superior to that material objects in contingent situations. Life, for all its confrontations, is the art of encounter. Another beautiful sentence. And no one is useless and no one is expendable. Encounter that becomes culture. Okay, this again kind of goes back to what he's talking about with person and people, right? What is important is to create processes of encounter, processes that build a people that can accept differences. Let us arm our children with the weapons of dialogue. Let us teach them to fight the good fight with the culture of encounter. I mean, that's beautiful too. That's absolutely beautiful. But I read that and I think, yes, Pope Francis, absolutely. I agree 100%. But at the same time, I'm thinking of the other Dominicans that I know who are chaplains at universities and come to me and share with me that they're having such difficulties because the younger generations right now can't dialogue and can't have conversations to such an extent that they have to text the priest back and forth the big issues they're dealing with because they can't do them in person because they're so used to just having this electronic intermediary when it comes to anything serious. And I'm like, yes, Pope Francis, absolutely. Let's arm our children with the weapons of dialogue. But yet all the stuff we're giving them right now is kind of hamstringing them so that they can't dialogue. And I'm like, anyway, when I read this, I'm like, you're absolutely right, Pope Francis. But we are so far away from that right now. We really need to do this huge revolution change that you're talking about here in order to get to that point. I don't know how to do it. Oh, anyway. Okay, this is the last slide, I think. Encounter becomes culture. Social peace demands hard work, craftsmanship, and the joy of acknowledging others. All this calls for the ability to recognize other people's right to be themselves and to be different. Liberty, equality, fraternity can remain lofty ideals unless they apply to everyone. And a false notion of tolerance has to give way to a dialogic realism. Oh, I have one more. St. Paul, yes, recovering kindness. Yes, that's how chapter 6 ends. We absolutely need this. St. Paul describes kindness as a fruit of the Holy Spirit, right? Individuals who possess this quality help make other people's lives more bearable, especially by sharing the weight of their problems, needs, and fears. Kindness ought to be cultivated. It is no superficial bourgeois virtue. Kindness facilitates the quest for consensus. So we need to be polite again. We need to bring kindness back into it. Everybody is just falling off the bandwagon. Anyway, that was chapter 5 and 6. So hopefully that was helpful.